Welcome, everyone. I am delighted to welcome you all here. My name is Max Grossman, and I am the director of the Joseph and Rebecca Meyerhoff Program and Center for Jewish Studies here at University of Maryland. I'm so glad to see so many people have turned out for what I know is going to be a wonderful and enjoyable event. Truly delighted to welcome you all here today for the fourth in our ongoing series of 5 Points lectures, a series that invites scholars to reflect on five statements, questions, or quotations that have driven their research agenda or their outlook on teaching over the course of their work to date. We envision this series as an opportunity for scholars to reflect on what they do and how they do it, and perhaps for some, even why. It's both a pleasure and an honor to welcome Professor Stephanie Shonnakan, the Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities, to present to us today. Dean Shonnakan, thank you for taking the time out of your extremely busy schedule to join us here. It's a pleasure to have you here. Um, a few words of introduction for the woman who needs no introduction. Dean Shonnakan is a professor of ethnomusicology in the Division of Musicology and Ethnomusicology at the UMD School of Music. She's also an affiliate faculty member in the Harriet Tubman Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies and the Department of American Studies. Dean Shonnakan has been at the university for 4 years, having previously served on the faculty at Columbia College Chicago, for many years on the faculty at the University of Missouri, and also at University of Massachusetts. Her leadership roles have included serving as chair of the Black Studies Department at Mizzou and as chair of the W.E.B. Du Bois Department of Afro-American Studies at UMass. Her return to Mizzou in 2020 as Senior Associate Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences led her then to her gig here at UMD, and we couldn't be more grateful to have her. Although a dean often spends time managing money and people and money, our dean excels at making people feel like they are part of the system and not cogs in the system. As our dean, Professor Shonnakan has created programs that reach out meaningfully to staff, professional track faculty, and students at all levels, truly building a sense of community around research, teaching, arts, and performance across the arts and humanities. Dean Shonnakan, it is a pleasure to offer you a moment to step aside from all these important roles and pivot back to your role as a scholar of ethnomusicology, folklore, and, if I may, religious studies. The Meyerhoff Center and the undergraduate program in religious studies are delighted to welcome you here to present your own take on the 5 Points lecture by exploring five songs that African American communities consistently cite as sites of worship, songs that function as prayer, testimony, and praise even when they emerge outside formal religious spaces. We are excited to hear your lecture, Precious Lord, Refuge, Reflection, and Revolution in African American Music, and I'm happy to offer you the microphone and welcome you here today.
Thank you, Max. Really, really grateful for the invitation, and very happy to see so many good friends and colleagues on the Zoom. It's a treat to be able to take the dean hat off for an hour and a half or so, and remind myself of my identity as a scholar, which I try to remind myself of that every day, because scholarship is such a big part of what we do as a college. So today I wanted to really turn my attention to something I've been thinking about a lot. And so Max has told me that this is 5 points. And so I will get to my 5 points, but I need to take 5 steps to get to 5 points. So I'm going to share my screen and then take us through what I hope will be a provocative, thoughtful discussion on African American music, particularly gospel music, and then have a conversation with you all about what I have presented. So let me share my screen. Let me see if I can find what I'm looking for. Hold on, right quick. It's not like we didn't try this already, right? Hold on. Okay. I'm ready now. All right. So, everybody can see that, Avis? Yeah. Okay. So, 5 steps to 5 points. I think it's really important to, first of all, set some sort of foundational understandings of why we have gospel music, what gospel music is, the history of gospel music, but also importantly for me, it's important to also show where we come into it as scholars. Like, how did I get to a point where I was really interested and found that this study of African American music was critical not only to our understandings of who we are as human beings, but also to my own understanding as a young Black woman who grew up in I was once young, yeah, okay, who grew up in West Africa. So the 5 steps, I'll talk about myself as step one, and my experience in African American music, and then I'll move quickly to a quick overview of the evolution of African American music and where gospel music sits in that evolution. Then thirdly, I do need us to think about what the aesthetics of Black music are, because we're going to be listening to some music in this presentation, and it's good to have a shared understanding of how scholars over the years have thought about the aesthetics of Black music. And then I want to talk very quickly in my fourth step about covers, what covers are, because in the end of the day, my fifth point is to focus on one song with 5 covers, and then I will talk about a few other songs. But let's take our steps first. So step one is thinking about myself. I take myself back to when I first arrived in this country in 1996 to go to graduate school at Indiana University in the ethnomusicology program. I arrived in Bloomington, Indiana, straight from Nigeria. In Nigeria, of course, we had listened to a lot of African American music. We had really watched a lot of music videos. I had read about Black music. I had studied it. I'd even written a master's thesis on jazz and poetry, African American jazz and African American poetry. So I thought I knew it all by the time I got here. And then in conjunction with that, I also grew up as Catholic. So let's go to the religious space quickly. I grew up Catholic, got married in the Catholic Church, and my husband grew up Methodist. So our experience in sacred spaces had always been with music that was really conservative, very much along the lines of the hymns that you might find in England or in any part of Europe. Our church experiences were very much aligned with the colonial experience as well. However, outside of church, African music was extremely vibrant, a lot of spontaneity, a lot of improvisation in our secular spaces. And so for me, church music was always very quiet, very subdued. And our music outside, again, this is in West Africa, our music outside of church was always exuberant, exciting, full of movement, and so on. When I arrived in India, in Bloomington, I went to an AME church, an African Methodist Episcopal church, in my second week of being here. My husband and I were taken to an AME church, and we were blown away by the music. What was interesting for us was that our experience of having exuberance outside and subdued inside a church was completely flipped in our experience at an African American AME church, because the music that we experienced in the church was just so exciting, so so animated. It was so full of life and excitement. And we realized that, as happens in around the world where African Americans have been dispersed, they have retained aspects of Africanisms that we ourselves in Africa had moved on from. And so and so that was a really it was an eye opener that African Americans, when they were transported through the slave trade, they brought with them these aspects of music making that they infused into their their church experiences that we did not do as a colonial nation back home in Nigeria. So that was my first aha moment about music in the Black church. We recognized it because we knew this is how we experienced music outside of the church in Nigeria, but being part of the sacred space was new for us. And so that's step one. While I was getting my act together as a graduate student, also, I began to work with two of the professors who are major to this field of the study of Black music, Portia Malsby and Melanie Burnham, who were my professors at Indiana University. One of them, a big name in the study of gospel music, that's Melanie Burnham, and the other, Portia Malsby, is probably the most important name when we think of the study of African American secular music here in the US. These two were giants in the ethnomusicology program at Indiana, and they advised me. I took all my classes, most of my classes with them, but also at the church that I went to, Portia Malsby was the organist, and Melanie Burnham was the musical director and the pianist. So understand what it was like for me as a young graduate student who had just moved here, who was committed to the study of African American music and culture and African music and culture, to be just infused with all of this knowledge, not only in the classroom space, but also in the worship space. It was an incredible, eye-opening experience as a graduate student. So these are the books that Melanie Burnham and Portia have written, and these are books that are used everywhere to study African American music. The first two are two editions of the Introduction to African American Music. I remember when they were writing this. I remember when they were pulling all the writers in to contribute to this really important volume. And then they did another book called The Issues in African American Music, which I have used these books in classes. Most people who teach Black music have used these in classes too. I'm proud to say that we're working on the third edition, and finally they're letting me contribute as well. So I'm excited about that. But that's step one. Understand where I'm coming from when I talk about Black music. Step two is thinking about the evolution of Black music. This is Portia Malsby, and her understanding and the way that she has talked and set out a schematic for how African American music has evolved over the centuries is, again, it's legendary. Everybody has used this. A lot of people have used this scheme. I'll talk about something else that she's worked on that has updated this later on. I don't want to say it now because it might distract you, but just know that that she has really spent a lot of her career and her teaching in the classroom. I remember when she was talking about this in the 90s, about understanding that any genre of Black music has come from the African musical roots. That when African Americans were brought here, when Black people were brought here from mostly West Africa and some other parts of Africa, but mostly West Africa, that they came with a particular approach to music making that Melanie Burnham then picks up on. But Portia Maltby says at every turn in American history, the music has also turned. And the music has also evolved. And so she breaks it into sacred genres. So what you see on the left is all the spiritual genres, the folk spirituals, which happened on plantations when the enslaved were introduced to Christianity. Then we moved to gospel, rural gospel in the late 1800s. This then evolves into the spirituals as art music, or what we would call arranged spirituals in the 1910s. After emancipation, African Americans were allowed then to go to college, and at college they would take the folk spiritual and put it on a score. And so this again created new sounds, new genres, and so on. It went through the gospel, the traditional gospel and contemporary gospel music, which is where we will talk a lot about the 50s, 60s, and 70s in this presentation. And then, of course, now we've got everything from hip hop rap to all kinds of things. In that middle column, we've got the African American secular genres. So everything from the blues to rural blues, urban blues, rhythm and blues. Rock and roll is definitely on here because she and a lot of us who study Black music would argue that rock and roll is rooted in Black music, and then onto things like hip hop and funk and so on. Then on the right side, we've got all the jazz genres. So that's how she created it. You'll see all the arrows going back and forth, meaning that what we hear in the spirituals influenced the blues, for example, and so on and so forth. We could do a whole class just on, or a whole session just on this schematic. Third step is to talk about the aesthetics of African American music. So what we saw on the previous slide, how do we pull together all the sounds that come from these genres, whether it's gospel music or funk? And so Melanie Burnham picks up on that. Both Melanie Burnham and Portia Maltby went to the University of Wisconsin. Portia Maltby got her PhD there, and Melanie Burnham got her master's there. Then Portia went on to Indiana to get her PhD. No, to teach. It was her first job, and she stayed there until she retired. So thankfully, that's where I found her just before she retired. And then Melanie Burnham came to Indiana and did her PhD there, and so she also became a professor there, and so they became this really interesting power dynamic. Burnham says that when we listen to Black music, or when we listen to, depends on how you define Black music. If you're thinking about it as she would say that we don't think about it as Black people doing music. It is music that comes out of the Black tradition, right? So we could have someone like, sometimes one could say Bruce Springsteen comes out of the tradition. We could say someone like Justin Timberlake comes out of the tradition. Some may even argue that Elvis Presley comes out of the tradition of Black music, Rolling Stones, and so on. So what is the tradition? The aesthetics of Black music, she would say, are threefold: that there's an approach to sound quality, an approach to musical technique, an approach to delivery style. That when we think about sound quality, whether we're thinking of the voices or the instruments, that the music that comes out of the Black tradition is not necessarily trained. And when I say trained, I put the quotation marks up, because what we mean there is that we are the folks who sing in the tradition um, may not pass an audition at a conservatory in the United States or Europe. Let's say Nina Simone or Louis Armstrong went for an audition at Juilliard and sang. Not likely that they would get in, right? Because of the aesthetics of Black music. But within the tradition of Black music, their voices are absolutely beautiful. And we think of this as we consider both voices and instruments. So the voices are sometimes described as soulful. What does that mean? Soulful is something that is seen as beautiful. It is almost indescribable, like we know it when we hear it. And so it's the sound quality. In terms of the musical technique, this is the one I think that is most distinctive when we think of Black music, that there is a freedom and a manipulation of time, text, and pitch, right? That what you see on the score might be stretched out depending on how the musician is feeling or how he is communicating with the audience. Audience is a big part. In fact, this middle part here should be the audience, because in Black music, in African musical traditions, the audience is a big part of the experience of music making. So, in terms of the technique, it is manipulated based on what the audience is feeling. So, time, text, and pitch. Time meaning that a 2-minute song might be stretched out to 4.5 minutes. It may be slowed down. It may be stopped so that there's some talking. Then there's an addition of text that may not be on the score. And so the manipulation of time, text, and pitch meaning that you may have a note that is then stretched out to find a result in a different note. That is the manipulation of time, text, and pitch, meaning a lot of spontaneity. And then lastly, the delivery style, that what we experience when we are at a Black music concert. There will be a lot of dance, a lot of movement. There's attention to dress and costumes, a lot of animation. The delivery style also says, because of the audience and what happens on stage, there's a lot of call and response, right? And there's a lot of emotion, a lot of spirit. So imagine these at the symphony. Very different approach to music making between the Black music tradition and others. Next thing I want to quickly go over is covers, because we are going to talk about covers in the presentation. I'm coming to my 5 points, but covers is our step 4. Covers are important because they establish the notion that there is a canonical or paradigmatic version of a song, right? So a lot of people have written about covers. I love covers. I'll talk about that at the end. My own work on covers, but Magnus and Widger, who are philosophers, have done a really good article on covers that was published in the Journal of Aesthetics and Art Criticism. They state, and I agree with all of this, that a version of a song is a cover when it is recorded or performed by an artist or a group who did not write and compose the song themselves, where there's a prior recording which is accepted as canonical or paradigmatic. They also say that one might treat songs and tracks as historical individuals. I really like that. And that will come in really handy as we go through our 5 covers. And so I like all of the points that they say are the basis for covers or for understanding covers. But this notion of a cover being a historical fact is one that we will come back to. And that each one is distinct and derivative. In their research, they look at the song Crazy by Willie Nelson and Willie Nelson and Patsy Cline, of course. And they go back and forth as to whether Patsy Cline is a cover or the original, since Willie Nelson wrote it, but Patsy Cline actually recorded it first. So an interesting conversation about that. And then Willie then went over her head and recorded it too. So there's a really great discussion of that. All right. Step 5, the song. So the song is, of course, Precious Lord, which, of course, is the title of this presentation, that was written by the great Thomas Dorsey. Thomas Dorsey, also known as the father of gospel music, who was born just at the turn of the century into the 20th century, born in Georgia, prolific, wrote and composed over 3,000 songs. Started off in the blues. So back to Portia Malsby's schematic, he starts off in the blues, country blues, and he was known as Georgia Tom, as he performed on piano with people like Ma Rainey, the mother of the blues, and made a little money off of that. He also felt that sacred music and secular music, that the line between them was very thin, and that sometimes a tune might be a secular tune, but you put some new lyrics on it and it becomes a sacred song. So really interesting thoughts from Dorsey on the division between sacred and secular music. He became the music director for Pilgrim Baptist Church in Chicago for over 50 years and influenced a lot of gospel singers from that role. He founded the National Convention of Gospel Choirs and Choruses. It's really well known in the gospel world, NCGCC. Important note about Dorsey too is that he started the first Black-owned publishing company for gospel music. So smart entrepreneur too, right? He felt that all these songs that were being written, that they should be owned by the people who wrote them. And this was a radical thought back in the day. And the fact that he was inspired by another great gospel pioneer, Charles Tindley. Charles Tindley came before Thomas Dorsey, but there is no Dorsey without Tindley, who was born in 1851 and was a Methodist minister and composer. What most of you will know is the song "We Shall Overcome," which becomes a big civil rights anthem in the 1960s, 50s, and 60s. Well, that song was it was patterned or appropriated from Charles Tindley's "I'll Overcome Someday." So I'm just going to play you a tiny bit of "I'll Overcome," just as a way of understanding how Dorsey was influenced and inspired. Just a tiny piece.
This world is one great battlefield with forces all arrayed. If in my heart I do not yield, I'll overcome someday. I'll overcome someday. I'll overcome someday. If in my heart I do not yield, I'll overcome someday.
All right.
Both seen and unseen.
So we can see the connection between "We Shall Overcome" and "I'll Overcome." There's one slight change in the lyrics where Charles Tindley wrote, In my heart, I do not yield, which I think is a critical stance, particularly as Charles Tindley is writing this before emancipation, right? And or at least he's born before emancipation, so his experience has been such that he feels the need to have "I do not yield" in his lyrics. Of course, later on, it merges to "I do believe," which is an interesting turn. So back to Thomas Dorsey. He's influenced by Charles Tindley, and of course does a lot of writing and composing and a lot of touring around the country. Well, in 1932, he was touring and he got a telegram, and the telegram said that his wife had just died. His wife died in childbirth, and he got that telegram while he was touring. And when and then the following day, his infant son also passed away. So he was taken over by grief, understandably, and decided that the God he served should not have let this happen. And he decided he would not be doing any more gospel music. And then he got home, still in the depth of grief, and sat at the piano. And I think must have been tinkering around with a song that I'm going to show you in a minute, a tune, a hymn, and then the words to Precious Lord came to him. And this was, again, a song that was written through his experience of grieving and mourning the loss of his wife and child. So this is the song, this is the tune that Thomas Dorsey was working with. It's an old hymn by George Nelson Allen called Maitland, and so I'll play a little piece of the tune. And so I'm sure that many of you are familiar with that tune. This might be what I might hear in Nigeria when I was growing up in the church. Just a beautiful tune, a beautiful hymn, very subdued, and without any flourishes or any like excitement around it. And so he wrote Precious Lord on this tune. And Precious Lord has gone on to do so well. It has served so many occasions and instances. It's been used at many, many funerals. Mahalia Jackson sang it at Martin Luther King's funeral because it was his favorite song. Aretha Franklin then sang it at Mahalia Jackson's funeral. Fantasia Barrino sang it at Aretha Franklin's funeral. And it's been sung at lots and lots of funerals because it does take that spirit of what Dorsey, how he wrote it, right? As a way of capturing the prayers that come when we lose a loved one. And so now we are at our first point. Okay, so what we're going to do for the rest of the presentation is just go through five covers, because I think each of those covers is distinct. Each of those covers is a representative of a particular moment in American history. And what I would like us to do here, and perhaps talk about during our Q&A, is how each artist has has changed the meaning of the song based on who they are as an artist, but also based on what is happening in the country at a particular time. So the first, of course, we have to go to the great one, Mahalia Jackson. But before we get to her, let's think about American history up to this point. Of course, we've gone through slavery, we've gone through emancipation, Juneteenth, as a moment in American history. We've gone through Reconstruction, the rise of the KKK across the South, and then the great migration of African Americans from the rural South to the urban North in search of better living. And then, of course, landmark cases like Plessy versus Ferguson that instituted racist laws in this country, segregation, Jim Crow, lynching, all of that, right? Then, as we approach 1956, we get to 1954 first, the Brown versus the Board of Education, which overturns the Plessy versus Ferguson law that was 1896. That means that, well, now we need to desegregate. It is not fair to have these facilities for Black people and then better ones for white folks. And so the board versus Brown versus Board is 1954. And of course, the backlash of all of these laws, these laws that are meant for good to overturn things are met with backlash from the people. So then a stream of more lynchings. In particular, I wanted to note 1955, the lynching and the killing, the murder of Emmett Till in Mississippi, and then 55 and 56, African Americans and allies are pushing back with the Montgomery bus boycott, which is when Rosa Parks has her moment. And this is the period of Martin Luther King's rise to national attention in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And so this is a moment, right? And 1956 is when Mahalia Jackson records Precious Lord. So I'd like you to really listen to it. We're not going to listen to the whole thing, but how does she approach it? How does she deal with the manipulation of time, text, and pitch? How does she bring meaning to it that serves to help us think about what's happening in the history, reminding us too that Martin Luther King would constantly ask her to sing this song at rallies. And so this was, again, a song that he felt was a great motivator for the movement. It's a little bit longer. She pulls it out to 4 minutes plus. I want you to listen to her voice. How do you think about her voice? What is going on with the piano and the organ? Where do we find moments of call and response? What does she do with the words? And what's the effect of all of this on us? So let's play a little bit. so sorry. So I don't know that there's any more gorgeous tone of voice than Mahalia Jackson. Of course, the mother of gospel. So when we get to the Q&A, I would love to hear your thoughts on what you heard. Every time she would reach a word that she wanted to emphasize, she really just took her time with it. There was no rushing this. She really wanted to convey a message of worship, of reflection, a prayerful and a tone of supplication, certainly a cry for help. 1956, the people who were marching, who were trying to overturn these segregation laws, needed help, right? The piano and the organ go back and forth in a call and response. She really emphasizes words like through the night, and through is, I mean, it just goes through so many changes. Just that one word. It's a one syllable word, but she brings so much to just that word, what folks are going through, right? And so on. So I don't want to spend too much time because Max is going to tell me it's time up in a minute. So that's our first one. That's 56. Then let's move to our second one. And this, I could not, it was hard to choose five, but you cannot have an experience of gospel music without James Cleveland. And James Cleveland, of course, is his version comes out, he records it in 1963. He's the king of gospel and really did a lot to sort of bring gospel from its country roots to its modern era, modern gospel. Interestingly, he sang as a young boy. He sang at Thomas Dorsey's church. So you can see the thread from Charles Tindley to Thomas Dorsey to James Cleveland. And James Cleveland, of course, was well known for working with people like Albertina Walker and the Caravans, Shirley Caesar, and so many others. He also worked with Aretha Franklin. So here we're going to watch a little, just one verse of this one. And I want you to see how it changes tone, it changes mood. 63, what is happening? Still in the throes of the civil rights movement. 1960, of course, we've got a continuation, the Greensboro sit-ins in 1960, the rise of SNCC in 1960, also under the mentorship of the great Ella Baker. 1963, of course, the Birmingham church bombing that killed 5 little girls. More lynchings. March on Washington is August of 1963. And interestingly, if I may just reference Mahalia Jackson again, in 63, when Martin Luther King was giving his speech, Mahalia was close by, and she said, quote, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." So it was under the instigation of Mahalia that we have the "I Have a Dream" speech from Martin Luther King. And then, so that's 63. And then, of course, 63 also is the assassination of JFK. So a lot going on still. But throughout history, the church, the Black church, has always been a place for spiritual engagement and spiritual upliftment. And we see that in James Cleveland's version of Precious Lord. Pay attention to how he cues folks in the choir. He's a master at it. Pay attention to the audience. What's the audience doing? What are the cultural gestures that really you will only find in a Black church or in spaces of Black life? What's the energy here, the improvisation, and what's the effect of it?
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on. let me stand. Come in, Dolores. I take my hand.
Jesus, please, Jesus, please, Jesus, take my hand. Precious Lord, and lead me home.
All right. One of the reasons why I'm playing the music a little bit longer than I should, because I know our time is coming up in a minute, is because I think that we need it. I think that we're going through so much right now as a society, as a world, as humanity, that music can help to sort of give us a place of refuge ourselves, whether we are Christian or not, whether we're Jewish. Music always serves to give us a solve. You're right, a balm for what we're going through, and it's so well exhibited and exemplified in James Cleveland's clip. The audience shouting, saying yes, sing on, really becoming part of the performance is just magnificent. And we can't say enough about the way Dolores deals with the text in this song. All right, fourth one is going to be, of course, we're moving now to 1968. And this is Nina Simone, well known, of course. In 64, we had the Civil Rights Act, 65, Selma, the assassination of Malcolm X. And then in 68, lots happening, but in 68, of course, the assassination of Martin Luther King, as well as Bobby Kennedy. Nina Simone, also known as Eunice Wayman, who is, great pianist who always brings so much energy and sometimes anger, but a lot of urgency to her music, was set to record a live album on April 7th of 1968. Martin Luther King was assassinated on April 4th of 1968. So just 3 days later, she went to do the recording at Westbury Music Fair for her album Nuff Said. So she includes this piece, just one verse. I'm going to play it here.
Precious Lord, take my hand, if you know it, lead me on, let's stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on.
All right. Gorgeous, beautiful, so stripped back for Nina Simone. And she's responding here to what has just rocked the nation, which is the assassination of Martin Luther King. This comes across, of course, interestingly, her tempo is faster than Mahalia's, um, but it is just as prayerful, um, just as it comes across as a lullaby in some ways, a lullaby for Martin Luther King to find rest. At the end of it, she says, "Good night, everybody." But it's also a goodbye to King as well. The way I like what she does with some of her melodic choices too, which makes it her own. Our fourth one is going to make us think a little bit more about the expanse of this song, right? Outside of Black music, or even outside of the Portia Maltby schematic, to thinking about how it moves into country music. And so we all know Charley Pride, big name, one of the only, for many, many years, one of the only names in country music who was Black. He records Precious Lord in 1971. And by this time, of course, there's been so much progress thanks to not only the civil rights movement, but also the Black Panther movement as well. And Black Power movement. So late 60s, early 70s, we see the Black arts movement rise. We see a lot of Black studies programs, African American, what will become African American studies departments and programs. Those emerge in the late 60s, early 70s. And then a lot of Black political leadership too. So there's been great movement. Charley Pride, who actually started off in the Negro baseball leagues, started singing, loved country music, and made his way into it it was difficult, because country music is by and large quite an exclusive musical arena, at least was at that time. One might argue still is. So here's his recording. I'm just going to play a tiny piece of the first verse, and then a little piece of the second verse. First verse is standard. Second verse, countrified.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired.
Right, so he does that for the whole first verse. And then we get him to the second verse. And this is where it changes.
Take my hand when my way grows drear. Precious Lord, linger near when my life.
All right. So you can hear the honky tonk come in. You can hear the steel guitar, the fiddle. It definitely, and then the sweet, clear, steady vocals that is so distinctive to country music is very much there. Now, if I could speak for a long time, I would argue too that country music is also Black music, but that's for another time. But it asks a question about what is gospel music, because there's a type of gospel music that is white, and then there's gospel music that is Black. The first verse asks us to really think about that. The second verse asks us to think about country music and its boundaries and its sound. And then finally, my fifth one, of course, has to be the great Aretha Franklin, because she does something incredibly different with the song. She actually merges the text of Precious Lord with Carole King's You've Got a Friend. It's incredible. Carole King wrote the song You've Got a Friend, and it was produced in 1971. And then in 72, Aretha, in her brilliant way, decides to merge those two songs. So I'm going to play it really quickly. The first, I don't know, maybe a little bit of the
You
first
need a
part.
friend.
And Jesus said, call my name.
I should mention that Aretha, of course, comes out of the Black church. Her father was Reverend C.L. Franklin, and she traveled with him to many rallies that Martin Luther King would run. So she is like really soaked in the tradition of Black gospel music. So let's do that.
Love and care. Ain't nothing, ain't nothing going right. Close your eyes.
All right, so there she's dealing with the Carole King song, and then second part is the choir doing Precious Lord. Oops, sorry. You don't want that one yet. Sorry, that's the bonus.
You need
I'm just gonna play a little piece of when she then merges both songs.
Yeah, you got a friend in Jesus. You got a friend in Jesus. Yes, you do. You got a mighty good friend in Jesus. I wonder, do you?
All right, so I will trust you to go back and watch this whole thing because it's actually really brilliant how she merges those two songs. So those are my 5 points. There is a bonus. I'm not going to play it because it's Elvis. But this version asks us to think about what happens when Elvis sings it in 1957. He plays it like just straight ahead, and there's no real embellishment because it's Elvis Presley. But it questions what he's thinking about in 57. Is he also thinking about the same kind of need, the same kind of urgency as all of the others that we've looked at? And then last thing that I'll say is that I do love covers, so I invite you to check out my podcast on NPR called Cover Story with Stephanie Shonikan, where I talk a lot about covers. So of course, I would talk about covers for this talk too, Max. So just check that out when you have time. And with that, I will stop sharing and hope that people are interested in talking about one of those 5 versions, and maybe there's one that particularly caught your attention, but I hope you've seen how the history and the version match up. And so I will hand it back to you, Max. Thank you.
This was just wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, for framing them in terms of your personal experience, for everything that you bring to us. This was truly a treat. Would you like to field your own questions?
Sure, either way,
Okay.
it's fine with me. Mhm.
Okay, so we have, I think we have until 1:45. If people have a few questions they'd like to share, feel free to raise your hand. If you don't want to speak, you can put your questions in the chat. I guess I can take the privilege. I try to sit back and not, but one of the things I found really compelling and powerful about the way you presented this material is that you located it in a couple of intersecting timelines. So there's a timeline of African American experience. There is a timeline of African American experience in the political realm and the civil rights movement. And there are these various musical histories and frames. How do you see those intersecting timelines contributing to your method in the project? How did you like braid or negotiate or think about that approach? I don't know enough about ethnomusicology to know whether there are set practices. But
Mhm.
when you came at this, knowing that you could see all these ribbons, all these pieces coming together, how did you get at it?
Mm, thank you, Max. And I see my friend Fernando Rios, who's my ethnomusicology colleague. He's on the Zoom too. Um, there you are. Hey, Fernando. I think we're the only ethnomusicologists on this. Um, this is really the underpinning of our discipline, which is that first of all, it's interdisciplinary. So we really focus on history, focus on culture, we focus on and the history, of course, is everything. And culture is everything. It's speech patterns, it's the way we talk, it's the way we walk, it's our folk tales, it's our folk ways, right? And so our ethnomusicology has us really go up a woven path. You know, it's always woven. There's
Mhm.
no study of the music without understanding who the people are that create the music and who the people are that consume it too. And then we make meaning from that. And that's why a lot of people, my students, have heard me say all the time that music can really help us understand who we are as a humanity. Fernando, would you like to add anything on that in terms of like how we approach our work?
That's a very broad question.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, I think, well, I guess one thing I was thinking about when you were discussing your examples, I teach a course on the music of Latino communities in the United States and also about, Latin American music. And I was just thinking of similarities, like we're going to cover Cuba this week. In the different ways you have musical expressions that blend Catholicism and like, African belief systems and all of this kind of interesting ways. So just seeing kind of parallels in Brazil and in Cuba and kind of elsewhere. So similar things, and they were often in dialogue with each other. That people were
Mhm.
kind of aware what's happening within the whole kind of Black diaspora, right?
Mhm.
So I think that's what I was thinking about when I was
Mhm.
seeing your
That's
presentation about the U.S. The U.S. iteration of it.
that's good. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, and so when Fernando talks about the diaspora, it is, and at the beginning of my presentation, I talked about the retentions of Africanisms. They're retained in Cuba a little bit differently than they're retained in the United States or Brazil. You know, every place has retained it in different ways, or Jamaica. And so that affects what we hear in the music. And Max, certainly the religious arena is a big part of that
Mhm.
as well. So I think it just comes to us because that's how we're trained as ethnomusicologists.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's lovely. Um, Eli Saltzman asks, can you speak more about the contemporary iterations of these songs and their cultural impact in the here and now?
Great. I see both Dr. Sagal and Dr. Doherty have said that they sing these songs in their churches. This song is still sung almost every Sunday across this country in churches
Mm.
that are various denominations, black, white, Catholic, even because it's now part of the um, of the of the hymnal. And so this song has been sung by Jimmy Swaggart. Okay, just put put it there. So the Evangelical Church, and then also Randy Travis and other country artists. So it's very much alive, Eli, in the contemporary world. As I said, Fantasia sang it at Aretha Franklin's funeral. I think that was in 2018. And as with the first note, everybody stands up because everybody knows the song and knows what it's for, and it just
Mm.
brings so much healing when we hear it. So it's doing its thing. It definitely is part of the canon now, and I think it's important for us to go back and see where it came from. and how one man was moved by what happened to him personally to help us all kind of work through our struggles as well. Same thing with Amazing Grace is another really
Mhm.
good example of a song that started off one man who was thinking about what he was doing in terms of contributing to the slave trade, and how it has evolved for all of us now.
Mhm.
Yes, Obama's Amazing Grace. Yeah, exactly. Did
Avital, did you
anyone?
have a question?
Sorry?
Oh, I just saw Avital put her screen on and I wondered if she had a
Oh,
question.
okay. Avital? Okay. Any one of these songs that you all favor, any one of the renditions that you felt, this was the one, the the most impactful one. Anybody? No favorites?
Lillian is voting for Mahalia Jackson.
I would second that, Lillian.
I've always loved her singing since I was a kid.
Mm, mm. Her
I found
voice.
myself I found myself sort of being transported to times that don't really line up with when the songs were first recorded. I had a couple of the earliest ones. I kind of had this deep body memory to the early 70s and being a kid and
Mm,
like they physically located me in places that makes me wonder
mhm,
if the TV had been on or if my mom had
mm.
been listening. Did other people have that kind of physical sort of displacement?
I think music always does that to us, Max. We remember the music we fell in love to.
Hmm.
We remember the music we were listening to when big events happened, um, as a nation or even to our families. Everybody has a wedding song that they dance to, like music has the ability to take us back to moments in our own personal history, but also in the nation's history as well. Precious Lord is very much connected to Martin Luther King's funeral. I think that was an iconic moment in musical history. It's like a time machine. I love that. Yeah. Mahalia. Okay, lots of votes for Mahalia. I think that is fitting, as it should be. Well, I really like Nina Simone's. I just think
Hmm.
Nina, who had done Mississippi Goddam, she had done like some really like militant stuff, which I also love. A song called For Women. There's an anger there because of what's going on. But when she gets to Precious Lord, she just pulls it back and she just allows it to soothe us as she soothes herself. And the nation was in dire need of soothing at that time. David, I think she was back, but I'm not sure. I should check. Thank you. Great. That's a good question. Because that would change the situation of where she was, would certainly change how it came across, for sure, for sure. Even though King's death and was felt around the world, it was felt very, very acutely here in the United States, for sure. Very good. Do I have to put my Dean hat back on now,
Sure.
Max?
No, not quite yet, because a bunch of people have commented on Nina Simone, and I wondered if there was more that you wanted to say about that moment, or just in some ways the differentness of her song, I think maybe captured us, that she represents a kind of a wrenching in the sense that timelines also have breaks in them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think also the Charlie Pride version is
Yeah.
so interesting because here's a man, and I remember reading Loretta Lynn's autobiography where she said that she was told he won the CMA in 1972, the same year that this came out. He was doing really well then. He won the Country Music Award for best male singer, and she was told, Loretta Lynn was the presenter, and she was told that when he comes, if he wins, should he win, if he comes back up to the stage, she must not kiss him. Like, do not hug him, do not give him a peck or anything, because he's Black. And indeed, she presented it and he won, and he came up on stage and she decided, you know what, I'm going to treat him as I would treat anybody else. And so she gave him a peck on the cheek. But she did it knowing that there might be some backlash, and there was. But for Charley Pride to kind of stick to country music, to really continue to claim it as his own, to the point of making the second verse very country. The second verse of a song written by a Black man, but also using a tune by a white man. It's a very American song, and his choice to bring the country to it, I think gives us an opportunity to really think about the extent of this song and what it has done over time.
When that cowboy beat picks up in the second verse, you're just like it, and the slide guitar, it all kind of it's remarkable, as you've said, how much work a single sound or a single word or a single intonation can do. And one of the things I find so fascinating about your work is your ability to engage with arts and humanities, your ability to say the music is doing something, and we can also talk about what it's doing. I think that's really quite powerful.
I have always used, Max, I've always used that to argue why I love this college so much, because I really feel myself comfortable in the humanities and comfortable in the arts. I don't know everything about the arts. I don't know everything about the humanities, but I know why they're important because of the slice of research that I have been involved in. I know the arts is important. I know the humanities are critical, and ethnomusicology, somewhat like art history, allows us to really straddle both the arts and the humanities. So that's why I feel very passionate about this college and what it does.
And I think that's perhaps the best note on which to thank you very, very much for this wonderful presentation, for your leadership and your scholarship and your teaching.
Thank you
and
so
thanks
much,
to
Max.
everyone who came, and we all enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.